My father used me and now I want revenge. I never thought I'd find myself in this situation, standing at the door of my father's house with a weapon in my pocket. But here I am, in the suburbs of Chicago, where every house looks like it came off the cover of a middle-class magazine. The perfectly manicured lawns, the whitewashed walls, the neatly planted flowers on the front porch, it all feels peaceful and perfect. But there's a real storm raging inside of me. My name is Jake McKenzie, I'm 35 years old, and I've lived in this town for most of my life. My father, Michael McKenzie, was a successful businessman who built an entire empire on real estate and investment deals. He was always a cold and calculating man to whom success meant far more than anything else. And then my mother, whom he left for another woman when I was only 10 years old. That event left a deep scar in my soul, but I moved on with my life, trying to deal with the pain and disappointment. All these years, I tried to avoid memories of the past, building my life on my own. But now, standing here, in front of the house where my childhood passed, I can feel the old wounds starting to bleed anew. He took my son from me. A wave of anger and despair rises inside me. Everything changed a few months ago when my father suddenly came back into my life. He announced that he intended to get my mother back and at the same time repair his relationship with me. I immediately sensed something was amiss. In Michael McKenzie's world, nothing just happens. It soon became clear that he needed help with something involving large sums of money and powerful people. So he decided to use our family ties to get what he wanted. And that's when she showed up, Sarah. My ex-girlfriend, who broke up with me when I left to join the army. She came back to town and got involved in the same affair as me. We ran into each other quite by accident and our past instantly flared up with renewed vigor. She was the only woman who truly understood me, knew my weaknesses and fears. And now she was also caught up in my father's dirty game. Our meetings resumed, and every time we saw each other, the tension between us grew. She tried to convince me that we should stick to each other despite everything going on around us. But I couldn't shake the feeling that her return was connected to my father's plans. Deep down, I knew that Sarah was the only one who could help me out of this situation, but I was afraid to trust her completely. After all, in Michael McKenzie's world, trust is a luxury you can't afford. We sat in a small cafe on the outskirts of town where no one paid attention to us. The smells of freshly brewed coffee and pastries wafted around, but there was tension in this oasis of calm. Sarah twirled her coffee cup nervously in her hands, her fingers delicately wrapped around the porcelain as if seeking the solace that was so unattainable. I had many thoughts, and each one added to the heaviness of the moment. Father had made us an offer that involved not just an exchange, but a real risk. He promised that if we helped him in one last matter, he would provide us with enough money for a new life, after which he would disappear forever, leaving only grim memories of his deeds. The case itself, however, was far more dangerous than we could have imagined. We had to deliver a package of documents to a man with ties to the mafia. The whole situation was shrouded in fear. If things didn't go according to plan, we were in serious trouble. I watched Sarah's face, her big brown eyes, which clearly showed fear and doubt. She was willing to go down this risky path with me, but she realized that not everything in this world ends well. I felt the cold fingers of anxiety clenching my heart as I thought about the possible consequences. In that moment, before I took that step, I realized this could be that point of no return. I tried to remain calm and hide my own fears. I understood the gravity of the situation, but at the same time it seemed to me that there was no other way out. It was necessary to hand over the documents to this man. Without handing over this package, our hopes for the future were rapidly disappearing. Without this money, our dreams of a new life could be in danger of bankruptcy. I had images in my mind, the scent of freedom and dreams of Sarah and me leaving this city and starting over, away from my father. I knew she was there to support me. We both realized that this was our only chance to escape the past. That money could have been our ticket to freedom, a chance to start a new chapter of our lives. Still, there was a question in my heart: was the price for our freedom too high? But as I looked at Sarah and realized that she was willing to take the risk with me, I felt a surge of determination. We had made this choice, and now our fate was out of our hands. That evening we went to the meeting that was to change our lives. The place had been chosen in advance, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, inherited echoes of the past and consumed by rust. This warehouse, surrounded by high fences and untended bushes, seemed the perfect place for the deed we were about to accomplish. Among the rusty cars and old containers we met a man in a black suit. His stern appearance indicated that he belonged to the underworld. However, his cold and confident eyes betrayed a high level of training and authority. The cause for which we were here left no time for idle talk. I could feel the adrenaline filling my veins when it was finally our turn to complete the task. Without a word, I handed him the package with the documents that were to be the key to our dreams of freedom. The man opened the packet in one motion and quickly flipped through the documents. There was tension in the air. Each of us realized that our lives and dreams were at stake. But it was quickly resolved. He looked up at us and nodded, as if to confirm that everything was in order. His words were short, but had a significant meaning. Now we just had to wait for a call from our father, who we hoped would soon give us the freedom we had long dreamed of. The man slowly turned around and walked away, leaving us with our timid hopes and fears in the darkness of the warehouse. We stood still, surrounded by the sounds of the night. In the distance we could hear the noise of cars and the rustling of the wind in the tall grasses. Suddenly the phone rang. It was my father. His voice sounded calm and natural on the other side of the line, as if we were just discussing the weather, not a deal that could change our lives. He complimented me as if it was something insignificant. He confirmed that the money would be transferred to our account tomorrow morning and ended the conversation without waiting for my response. I glanced at Sarah. Her face was pale, and I noticed that fear was mixed with a spark of hope in her eyes. Our lives, our decisions, it all came down to this moment. The next morning we rose early as the pre-dawn light slowly filled the sky, filling the room with a soft glow. Excitement overwhelmed me as Sarah and I headed to the bank to check our account. We were hoping to see an amount that could change our lives, giving us freedom and a fresh start. But to our surprise, only zero popped up on the screen. No money. A silence hung in the air, pressing down on us, until I noticed a new message from my father. In the business-like tone I'd grown accustomed to over the years, he wrote, "Sorry guys, but business is business. I hope you understand that." Like a thunderbolt, his words came as a shock to us. All our hopes and dreams of a new life, that everything would eventually work out, crumbled in an instant. The desire for revenge overwhelmed my mind, and I could feel the anger filling my mind like black poison. But the worst was still ahead. Later that evening, two men in strict suits came to see me. Their impeccable appearance and cold-blooded facial expressions indicated that they were involved in my father's business. They didn't inspire confidence and acted as if they weren't here for a peaceful conversation. One of them came closer and handed me an envelope, as if it were a letter with important news. I felt fear growing inside me. These documents could be the beginning of the end. The first man spoke a few words that cut like a sharp blade. He informed me that my father was asking me to sign documents. This agreement was to transfer custody of my son Jack, the only light in my life, into his hands. My heart sank, and I felt a cold sweat run down my body. I couldn't let this happen. Jack was the only one I fought for, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. Unable to contain my emotions, I pushed the envelope away and shouted back their demands. They exchanged glances. One of them remained calm, but there was a threat in his eyes. The other drew his weapon, and the cold gleam of metal glinted in the dim light of the room. He aimed straight at me. I felt panic overwhelm me, but I knew I couldn't give up. The feeling of hopelessness and fear wrapped around me like a ligature, but at the same time I knew that if I signed these papers, I would be betraying the most precious thing I had. I had to find a way to fight and protect my son, even if it meant fighting the devil himself. I was faced with a difficult choice: sign the papers and lose my son, or fight to the end, risking everything for his safety and future. My mind swarmed with thoughts of what that fight would mean. What did it really mean to risk the life of the person you loved most in the world? Was I afraid for myself? It would be easier than imagining Jack ending up in the hands of my father, who was capable of anything for his own interests. Looking at the envelope, I felt my hand reaching for the pen. As I signed the document, I knew it wasn't easy. It felt like betrayal. I left my signature, feeling each movement of my hand tear a piece out of my heart. The men took the papers and left me alone in the empty room, where silence reigned, broken only by the sound of my intermittent breathing. I felt like a traitor who had to pay the price. Nevertheless, a fire of anger flared inside me. I couldn't stand idly by any longer. The thought that Jack might be under the control of a man capable of intimidation and manipulation blinded me with rage. I realized I had to act before it was too late. This was a battle for my son's future. I hurriedly dialed Sarah's number, feeling the pressure building in my chest. As I told her all the events, I realized I wasn't alone in this nightmare. An hour later, she was already at my place. When the door opened and Sarah walked in, I was both relieved and hesitant. We sat down next to each other and began strategizing a plan that could help get Jack back. Time was running out, and we realized there was too little of it left. My father had already begun the process of transferring custody, and the thought that Jack would soon be under his control came to me at an astonishing rate. This prospect was unbearable, and a desire arose in me to not only save my son, but to defeat the father who had always caused fear in our lives. We had to do everything we could to protect our family. After spending a lot of time trying to find a way out of this situation, I realized there was nothing I could do. My father had too much influence. No matter how hard I tried to find workarounds, there was nothing I could do. The only thing left was to go to my father's office and try to talk to him. He agreed to this conversation, but I had a bad feeling about it. The conversation didn't go well from the start. I tried to challenge his influence. Instead of running away empty-handed, I began to air all of my father's crimes in his own office, not giving him a chance to refute his actions. He was sitting at his desk. There were papers on his desk, and one of them he was scrutinizing. He completely ignored all accusations, his face remained impassive, and his reaction was cold-blooded, like everything in his life. He looked at me with contempt and uttered words that brought out the anger in me. Those words were about my mother, her weaknesses, and the claim that I had inherited her traits. That was the last straw of patience. My whole life flashed through my mind. Having accomplished nothing, I left the office disappointed. Now, a week after our last meeting, I stand at the door of my father's house with a weapon in my pocket.